Hey there, welcome back to Season 7 of the Product to Product podcast. My name is Latif Nanji, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of Roadmunk. This season, we're going to explore Product Sense, what it is and how it fits into your product development lifecycle, and how you can get better at it. We'll have PMs share tactical advice, as well as their successes and lessons learned. Today, my guest is Peter Yang, who's a senior group product manager working on live audio at Reddit. Previously, he's held product roles at Credit Karma, Twitch, Twitter, Facebook, and Microsoft earlier in his career. Thank you for joining me today, Peter.
Great to be here, Dave. Yeah, thanks for inviting me.
Awesome. So just to get the audience warmed up to you, can you talk a little bit about your role at Reddit? Let me do that again. Let's start with the audience getting to know you a little bit. Can you talk about your current role at Reddit and what live audio is exactly?
Yeah, so right now I'm leading product for Reddit Talk, which is our live audio product. And our goal is to let communities have, authentic voice conversations, right? Kind of bring an element of live to the platform. And yeah, it's going pretty well. We have 50 plus communities trying out the product and all kinds of conversations, everything from people telling dad jokes to famous speakers doing AMAs. Yeah.
That's awesome. And you've had such a wealth of experience working in Silicon Valley companies and the tour. Can you talk a little bit about how you've developed what we kind of call in this theme of the podcast product sense? How would you define it for yourself and throughout your career in terms of what sort of qualitative elements have really formed you to become the product manager you are?
Yeah, so I think product sense is kind of like a fancy word for just understanding what the customer wants, right? Understanding what problem you're solving for the customer. So I think two experiences have had a big impact on me. The first experience was working at Twitch/Amazon, and I really like Amazon's working backwards process. But to summarize it, it just involves asking a few very important questions when you think about any product. Number one, who is the customer? Number two, what is the customer problem? How do we know that this problem actually exists? And what is the most important customer benefit that you want to provide? Like a lot of PMs and products, they want to provide like multiple benefits, but it's very important to focus on the most important benefit, right? And finally, what Amazon does is they make you write a press release, leap forward in time, talk about a product using customer language. And that's just like a really good practice to wrap your head around the product and to also align different stakeholders on what you're trying to build. That's number one. Number two, I would say, is actually during my time at Reddit. Reddit is a very community-first platform, right? It's the OG community platform. And while working at Reddit and also kind of getting involved on Twitter, I came across this concept called community-led product development. And I think it's a really important concept. A lot of PMs, they just ask questions for customers, right? They talk to customers one-on-one or in like focus group scenarios. But actually building a customer community is a really powerful way to kind of understand what product your customers want, but also to kind of get early adopters and get your customers to champion your product for you. So those are kind of two different things that I came across for process.
That's awesome. I think the second one, I was fortunate enough to be on a panel last month with a great onboarding tool called Chameleon around community-led product development. And you wrote a great piece on this. Can you talk a little bit about, maybe what are some of the unique characteristics about it and how it could be beneficial? And also, can you talk a little bit about some of the missteps that builders at scale may ignore around this and that they may want to tap into?
Yeah, so I think the unique benefits of it are that you have this almost daily feedback loop with your customers. And you usually it's the people who are most excited about your product that are willing to spend the time to give you feedback and be part of this community. But you have this daily feedback loop, which I think is super important. The other thing is that if they feel like they're part of the journey with you in building the product, once you actually start launching the product or you put it out there, they will be your strongest champion, right? So like, for example, building this audio product with the Reddit moderators, the people who are involved in my community are the strongest champions of this audio product. And it's much better for another moderator to hear the pitch from a fellow moderator than from like a Reddit product manager. It's much more effective. And your second part of the question, I've noticed that, I've worked at a couple of these like large Silicon Valley tech companies, and I noticed that as the company scales, as more PMs get hired, what usually happens is the PM becomes way too metrics obsessed instead of customer problem obsessed. They're measured based on what kind of metrics they can push. They run a bunch of A/B tests. They they kind of lose touch with the customer a little bit. And part of that is also because there's also a lot of different internal stakeholders that they have to talk to and also even get approval to even be able to talk to the customer, right? And to me, it's super important. Like the reason I do product is to talk to the customer and to build what the customer wants. So to me, having that daily feedback loop is what gives me energy and is what gives me satisfaction from the job.
Yeah, I think that's really nailing it on the head, especially as founders and builders scale and their businesses start to do millions in ARR. They spent that early time building out champion customers, and now they let the team handle it, and they lose that connective tissue with the customer. And I really like the other point you mentioned around them becoming the strongest champions and also hearing those customers speak to other customers in that community format. Can you talk a little bit about how to, if you're a founder and you've got a couple million in ARR and you want to start building a community, how would you give them the advice? Like, where would you tell them to go do that? What kind of things would they think about so that they can actually get this off the ground and build some momentum behind it versus having sort of these, let's just get everyone together for one call and do our quarterly CAB meeting. That can be impactful from like an executive perspective, but the continuous nature that I think community really needs to be defined by.
Yeah, I think you're totally right. Like the real magic from community comes from your customers being able to talk to each other, right? That's the key difference between a community and just like doing like a conference call with your customers, right? So, the steps are usually you want to set up a community. You can use like Discord or Slack or forum-based software like Reddit. Set up a community, invite your customers to the community. Be like, hey, I want to build this product with you. I love your feedback. Come in this community, meet other customers, and build with me. And you don't need to have that many people in a community. You can just start with a dozen or 20 or so, and slowly grow it from there, right? And like once you have people in the community, make sure you are active in the community. You just have authentic dialogue with the customer, not very kind of formal kind of way, but like you can share product screenshots, you can build in public. But it's also important just to have channels to hang out with your customers. Talk about Squid Game or whatever the coolest TV show is at the moment, and just kind of like build that relationship, make them part of your team, right? And I think once you do those two steps, then all of a sudden you realize that instead of just like your product team of engineers and designers, you also have this extended team of customers who really want to see you and the product succeed. And that's like super motivating and super powerful. Yeah.
I love that. And it's interesting because when I think about what you're saying, it's also not just for companies that are early stage, right? Like if you've got a new product idea and you've got this community, you can even branch off and say, I want to take, that community could be hundreds of people. You could also just branch off and be like, I've got this new wild integration idea and we've got 15 or 20 people that I think can make a little sub community from that community. I could feel like that there could be elements of that community starting to evolve as the business scales and actually be a bigger participant. And I'm getting the sense that that's something that a lot of companies aren't necessarily leveraging today. How are you guys doing that at Reddit? I mean, obviously you guys are a community platform. Do you guys use Reddit when you're building out new ideas and using subreddits to work with your customers on? And has that been a practice you guys have embraced?
Yeah, we use private subreddits to talk to customers that really care about whatever feature or product we're working on. And now that Reddit Talk is kind of out in the wild, I hope that we will use the audio product to also just kind of chat live with the moderators and with our customers to just have this dialogue. It's a lot easier to have misunderstandings over text than through actual voice. So using different formats and having that dialogue, I think is really important. Yeah. We also have a program where we have Reddit employees who actually become moderators for like a few months to try it out and kind of like live in the shoes of moderators for a little bit so that you kind of have that empathy, you kind of have that mentality of where your customer is coming from. Yeah.
That's great. To kind of jump off this conversation of community-driven or community-led product development, one thing that you posted, and I think this may relate to a company that I'm a huge fan of called Superhuman, as I am an avid early user of them, is good PMs obsess about customer problems. Great PMs obsess about how they want their customers to feel while using the product. Can you just talk a bit about where that came from and what had sort of inspired that thought?
Yeah, so I did an interview with Rahul, who is the CEO and co-founder of Superhuman. Superhuman is this it wants to be the fastest email platform ever made, right? So, and number one, the fact that Rahul was willing to just spend time to walk me through a product and kind of like streamline workflow is very impressive because he's the CEO and I'm just like a random customer that he has, right? So that goes back to kind of customer obsession, community obsession. But number two, to answer your question, I think Rahul comes from a gaming background, and I also really love games. If you think about it, games don't really solve any real customer problems. They just kind of entertain you, which I guess is a customer problem. But I mean, the best games, like RPGs and stuff that I've played in the past, they elicit some kind of emotion, right? And like I still remember to this day, like playing, I'm also like playing like StarCraft, playing World of Warcraft, and the feeling of accomplishment, the feeling of joy that I get from doing a great raid or playing a great match. And I think what people remember about products is not so much, oh, this product helped me do this. It's about how this product made me feel, right? So PMs that really care about craft, PMs that really care about shipping something like that's actually really good, should care about how their product makes their users feel. And Superhuman has this whole like emotions wheel that they use to kind of really precisely define what kind of feeling they want people to have using the product. And like I think that's really a good North Star or map towards the product that you want to build. Yeah.
When you say emotional wheel, can you just double click on that for us? Like, what kind of emotions are they trying to optimize for, or that, even in your personal experience that you would want to be optimizing for the products that you're managing today?
Yeah, so the whole point of the emotional wheel is to get really precise about the emotions, right? So for Superhuman, they are optimizing for joy. They want to help people get to inbox zero and feel a sense of joy. But they don't say joy. They go down the wheel and they define it as joy splits into enthusiasm, excitement, hopefulness, optimism, accomplishment, triumph, like more nuanced emotions like that. And for their inbox zero images, they actually pick the images that elicit each of those nuanced emotions. And getting down to that level of detail really kind of helps people feel, because everybody can feel joy in their daily life, but people remember a time where they actually feel hopefulness or they actually feel some sense of accomplishment, right? So kind of getting to that level of detail. I mean, for my products, when I worked at Twitch, one of the products I worked on was called Raids, where a streamer can raid another streamer and bring on their viewers and kind of like help the other streamer grow. And I didn't think about it at the time, but really, you can see the emotion on people's faces when they get a raid. They get surprise, they get excitement, they get joy, and they build that kind of bonding, they build that kind of relationship. And it's just a really good thing to see. And I still remember those moments of the best raids that I've seen people using the product. Um, so, it's much more memorable than be like, oh, I'm solving a problem of growing some metric by X%, or I'm trying to help people grow their channel. Like that emotion is what sticks with me. It's not the logical aspect of it.
What I like about this particular example and just having this emotional wheel, which I believe came from the Junto Institute of Entrepreneurial Learning, which you can Google online if you're listening to this, it really unpacks exactly the experiences you want to map for your customers and your users. And just as a mental exercise, even just listening to you right now, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, what is the feeling someone has in this workflow in our application? Is it joy? Are they content, or are they maybe a bit confused? And then being able to map what the emotional state is today versus where you want it to be can actually be a really cool exercise in how your users perceive the experience of what's going on. And then being able to communicate that and help that as part of the prioritization almost into your roadmap. So there's a really beautiful tie in there that I've actually never sort of considered as an exercise, but that's been an inspiration from what you just said.
Yeah, that's totally on point. I mean, you can also think about when you think about the customer problem, think about what kind of negative emotions the customer is feeling as they're struggling with the problem, and think about how you can kind of build the opposite emotion to that in your solution. Yeah.
That's awesome. Um, you know, it's interesting that there's this kind of cross-pollination of gaming, and I was kind of hoping you could talk a little bit more about this because it was almost like gaming invents a set of problems you didn't even know you needed to solve.
Mhm.
And so you just get obsessed with solving them, and they make you addicted to sort of solving those problems. Um, can you talk a little bit about uh, is there certain uh, things that you've introduced inside of your product experience that you've seen work from gaming in your own personal experience that has made your products more successful or more sticky?
Mhm. Um, I mean, yeah, I think first of all, gaming is like a ultra competitive industry. People's attention are limited, and um, gaming, you really do have to craft a delightful experience. It's not like SaaS software where it's not like I don't know, it's not like Workday where you can just like put some stuff together and then people have to use it because it's part of the company. The company pay for it, so you have to use it, right? Gaming, you have to, if you don't like gaming, you just like bounce at any moment. You can go play another game. Um, so you're asking where I've kind of integrated gaming mechanism into my own product, right? Yeah, I have a good example. I'll go back to Twitch. We built this product called Achievements, and I think this is a really good lesson in intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation, right? So when people talk about gaming, correlated to that is called gamification, which is like, oh, you just launch a bunch of like trophies and achievements and awards, and give people a bunch of like shiny stuff, and people will be motivated to accomplish what they're trying to accomplish. And I think that only works if there's intrinsic motivation. So for Twitch achievements that we launched for the streamers, we came out with like a whole bunch of achievements, and people didn't care about like 80% of them during like user research. They only care about the achievements that actually help them track their progress towards making money on the platform and actually like, trying to make a living on the platform, right? Because at the end of the day, they're like streaming 8 hours a day because they want to make a living and they want to self-sustain themselves. Random shiny swag or like, random shiny things on their profile, they don't really care about. They just want to, they only care about the achievements that actually help them accomplish their overall goals, if that makes sense. And I think a very common mistake that a lot of people make when thinking about gaming is they just try to gamify the experience. There was a whole trend around gamification a couple of years ago. And it doesn't work if there's no interest and motivation. So it doesn't work if you don't really understand what the customer is actually trying to accomplish, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Totally. I wanted to quickly switch gears here because I know that you've um, teach a course over at Build for Creators, and you've also got a newsletter. But to that, a culmination of work seems to have led to this book called Principles of Product Management. Can you talk a little bit about what inspired you to write that book and who it's really aimed towards? Is it aimed towards product managers of all shapes and sizes? And yeah, would love to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I mean, I actually started my creator journey by writing a full book, which I don't recommend. It's a lot to take on if you're just getting started creating content online. Uh, but the reason I wrote that book is because, like I struggled to become a PM, right? Like I failed the Facebook PM interview loop 3 times in a row, like 3 years in a row, and like it was like very difficult. And eventually, I was able to finally become a PM externally. But I didn't want other people who were trying to become a PM to feel like they're like alone and have to go through the same journey as I did, right? So I wanted to kind of like share the advice that I learned along the way. And the book is split into 3 sections. The first section is just like core principles that you should just have as a PM and as a leader, right? Taking ownership, having high empathy, like stuff like that, and stories around that. Second section is around building a mission, vision, strategy, and roadmap, like the actual process to build a great product. And then the third section is about, how you can transition into product management or start trying to figure out how to ace the PM interviews. So it's really targeted for people who are kind of either transitioning to PM or new in their career as a PM and helping them get started off on the right foot. That makes sense.
Absolutely, it does. And can you talk a little bit about maybe kind of tying back to the beginning of how you define product sense in those 2 areas? Can you talk a little bit about, what are some of the core principles, if you want to tease out, because it is called Principles of Product Management, that people who are listening to this that may be junior product managers, that a few things that you would leave them in terms of how they can really get their journey started in a progressive way?
Sorry, can you just ask that question again, just so I understand it a bit better? Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, that could have been a bit confusing. For sure, no problem.
Yeah.
So, just to follow on to that, you've got these principles in the book. Can you give us a teaser of a couple of those principles and how they may tie towards our theme of product sense?
Yeah, sure. So I think one of the principles is taking ownership, right? What does taking ownership mean? It means ultimately, as a PM, you're responsible for the success or failure of the product. Unfortunately, as a PM, a lot of times you don't have full control over everything. You have to rely on other people or influence other people to get things done. But ultimately, you're responsible for success. And so when it comes to product sense, you're ultimately responsible for understanding all the different all the different channels that you can use to understand what the customer wants, from metrics to customer interviews to community. You're responsible for like synthesizing all this stuff and define the right product experience to actually solve the customer problem, right? And if it doesn't happen, if you ship something that the community reacts negatively to, or it gets delayed, or the metric doesn't move, then it's kind of you should take responsibility. And if you do that, I think you will inspire your team, and you will be able to quickly pivot to something, hopefully, that actually does solve the customer problem. I think the defining moments in my career has been times where things didn't work out on the first try, but I took ownership of it. I told all the execs and told my entire team, like, hey, this is something that I kind of screwed up on, and they really appreciate that, and that allows you to kind of start recovering from that mistake. Yeah.
That's brilliant. I think anyone who's listening can appreciate that. And I know even early on in my career, those are those moments when you can easily find someone else to point the finger at, and that is the least helpful way to progress. Because as soon as you own it, you then understand and break down the problems that were missed and truly find how to work with customers to solve what's required to get them that greatest benefit, like you said. Um, Selfishly, I have to ask, you've got a book you've written, you've worked some incredibly high demanding jobs. How do you balance your personal time to be able to create all this content and fulfill your day job activities and responsibilities?
Yeah, it's pretty hard, to be honest with you. It's pretty hard. I mean, I think it's just realizing what your priorities are and like prioritizing the highest impact stuff that you can do in a day, right? So like, just like, being a good PM, I try to make a list of no more than 3 things that I want to accomplish in a day. And if other things fall by the wayside, then they can fall by the wayside, right? Um, but I do think it's important to have something on the side other than your main job because it kind of helps you explore what you're curious about. And it also helps you build some sort of a reputation outside of your company. And I think for me, at least, that has made a world of difference. It's almost like my reputation is not tied to whatever company I work for. It's more tied to my own personal brand or, what I'm doing. Yeah.
That's awesome. And it sounds like even from what I've seen online, you've also got a huge interest in a space where a lot of technologists seem to be playing. And maybe you can give us a soundbite as to your thoughts on the future of crypto and NFTs as part of our kind of last few outro questions that we have for you here.
Sure, man. Yeah. I mean, I think I think there's this concept called permissionless learning, right, or permissionless work. People trying to become PMs, they don't have to, but like the typical path is to go to good school, go get like a rotational PM job at Facebook or something, and like start climbing the ladder, and spend all this time practicing for process interviews, behavior, and all that kind of stuff. And what I really am passionate about is allowing anybody to go directly to the customer online and like make a living and like kind of prove their worth by going directly to the customer instead of having to go through a bunch of gatekeepers. And I think that's what crypto is all about, right? So crypto allows you, because you can basically trust the blockchain for processing your transactions. Crypto allows creators, it allows people to basically own the upside of their work instead of having to give a bunch of revenue away to these centralized platforms. And there's like a lot of scams, there's a lot of like noise out there in crypto, a lot of hype. But I think that's what makes me super excited about this whole Web3 crypto stuff. Letting the creators, letting the people with knowledge and the passion own the upside from their work, and also letting them bring their fans and bring their community along the way, and letting those fans also own the upside. I think it could potentially revolutionize, get a lot more people to start communities, start companies, and like kind of go down that path. Yeah.
That's fantastic. And the creator economy is something that you seem to be really plugged into.
Yeah.
And with, a lot of live streaming going on, and, I follow a few people in that world that spend their entire day having to stream. Can you talk a little bit about where you think the space of the creator economy is going in the next 3 to 5 years? Seems like there's some really good incentives. Seems like people could do this from their house, but like, where do you have a particular perspective on where this market is going?
Yeah, so I think my perspective is that the creator economy will become the crypto economy. That's my perspective. And it's not to undersell everything that's helping creators make money right now, like YouTube, Substack, like all these platforms. There's billions of dollars that creators are making from these platforms, right? But I think creators are the full-time creators are very business savvy. They want to own their audience. They want to own the upside from their work. And I think you're going to see a lot more creators jump into NFTs, social tokens, communities, DAOs, all this kind of crypto stuff, because they can basically like build their own business and they can own the upside from their business without the risk of relying on like a centralized platform. So there's a lot of hype again, but I think this stuff will happen and play out over the next 5-10 years. And instead of subscriptions and tipping, you're going to see more and more creators just like use crypto to make a living.
Absolutely brilliant. I hope the world goes in that same direction, and that the creator economy really does become its own version of that emergence of crypto together. So there's a huge future in there, and I'm hoping in a few years, in our next few seasons, we can get an update from you on that as well. Just to wrap it up here, it seems like you're very active on social media. Where can listeners find you?
Probably best two places are on Twitter. My handle is Peter G. Yang. And then on my blog, it's creatoreconomy.so. Would love to connect with you there.
Fantastic, Peter. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today.
Cool, Latif. Thanks so much, man. Yeah.
Awesome.